we'll be talking about another important topic of the chapter Organism and Population, that is population interaction, or we also call it as interspecific interactions. Now, what does the term mean? Till now, we have seen different type of the population structure, the factors that affect the population density, and various other adaptations. Now, here we know that when a species is occupying a habitat, it is not only that particular species that is occupying the habitat, but instead there is a constant dependence of one species on the other for its survival. So, this interdependence between the species can be for food, it can be for the space, for protection, providing the reproduction, facilitating reproduction, etc. So, this interdependence among the species for various reasons is known as population interaction or interspecific interaction because it is for various causes. Now, when we talk of if you imagine about a plant which is capable of producing its own food, making its own food, even that is not able or will not be able to survive alone because it will require first the plant, when we say it's an autotroph, but still it will not be able to survive. The plant will be dependent on the soil microbes, that is the microbes which are present in the soil, to break down the nutrients and provide it in a form which can be easily absorbed by the plant for performing photosynthesis. Also, this plant is dependent on the pollinators. The pollination is important for the plant for its survival or continuing its species. These pollinators can be mainly the insects apart from the other animals. So we find various type of interaction, and insects on the other hand get the benefit of getting the nectar from the plant. Similarly, there can be several interactions. Now here we are going to understand what type of interspecific interactions are taking place. So here we are going to talk about the species, but let us understand the symbol. The plus sign will be used when it is beneficial for a species. The minus sign will be used when it is harmful for a particular species or not beneficial. And 0 we will use if there is no effect on that particular species. So these symbols will be using. Now first case is when both the species are benefited. There is a case between the interaction. So here it will be beneficial for both species. So species A plus and species B also plus. Such a type of interaction in which both the species are benefited is known as mutualism. So here both the species will be benefited from each other. We can understand it by an example. Let us take the example, first example of lichens. Now lichen is an association of fungi and also algae. Now, how are they benefiting each other? It's an association between these two. And here, as we said, they are example of mutualism. That means both the species are benefited. Now, what is fungi doing actually? The fungi actually provides protection. It provides protection to the algae. Also, it absorbs nutrients and water. Now, when we talk of algae, algae actually prepares food because it's autotrophic. So it prepares food. Now, fungi being saprophytic, it cannot prepare its own food, but algae prepares food. So, this food which is prepared by the algae can be utilized by the fungus, whereas fungi, and whereas on in return the algae gets the protection and also the nutrients and the water which can be used for preparing the food. So here we find that both the species are benefited and therefore they show an example of mutualism, and it is also known as symbiotic relationship. So type of mutualism is symbiotic over here, and it is a permanent association. It is a permanent association. It's not a temporary association. It is a permanent association for mutual benefit. And in absence of any of this, for example, if the algae, it cannot survive alone without the fungus, and this fungi cannot survive in absence of algae. So it's kind of a permanent relationship between each other. Now, another example which we'll be talking about is mycorrhiza. Now, mycorrhiza is an association between the fungi and also the roots of higher plants. It is an association between these two. Now, mycorrhiza is again an example of a mutualistic relationship. Now here the fungi absorbs food. It's saprophytic, so it can only absorb food, minerals we say, or nutrients, and specially, very specially, phosphorus. It is absorbing phosphorus, whereas the plants provide the food and shelter. So here we find that again there is a kind of relationship which is important, and it is also a compulsory, or we say symbiotic. It's also an example of symbiotic mutualism, because again if the roots of higher plants do not have the fungi, then it is observed that the growth is affected, and therefore fungi is important for the proper growth of these group of higher plants. So mycorrhiza is an again example of a mutualistic relationship between the species. Now, again, the third example which we'll be talking about is an interesting example. Over here, we'll be talking about orchids. Now, here, orchids are again an example. Orchids are found in Mediterranean region, and these orchids are, especially we'll be talking about a certain species, and they have different variety of floral patterns, that is they try to attract the insects. Till here now we have talked about the food as a food, and the material and the protection as the thing for the mutual survival. Now orchids have the flower arrangement and they need to get pollinated. Now, these orchids have various kinds of floral arrangements to attract the insects for pollination. Now, example we are taking is orchis. Now, what it is doing, orchid? In this, it's kind of a pseudo copulation. Pseudo copulation means it's an example of pseudo copulation. Now, orchis has a flower, and that flower is actually having a very close resemblance to the female bee. So this orchis plant has a resemblance to female bee. And for pollination, they need the bees. Right? The pollinators are bees. Now, orchis flower resemble to female bee, one petal, and the resemblance is very close to the female bee. Now, the male bee gets attracted towards the female bee and it pseudo copulates, and during the copulation act it will dust, copulates, thinking it as a female, it copulates. At the same time, it brings the pollen grains and the pollination takes place. So here, the advantage is both the species are getting the benefit. The male bee is transferring the pollen grains to the plant so that the fertilization can happen, and at the same time the male bee gets the reward in the form of nectar, and also it is transferring the pollen grain. So both the species are benefited. And over here, if there is any change in the resemblance of the female bee will happen, then the male bee will not be able to copulate over there, and as a result the pollen grains will not be transferred. Since this is not true copulation, we have called it as pseudo copulation. Another example is that of fig trees. So we'll talk about another example, that is fig trees. Now, fig trees are found in Mediterranean in rainforests, and their inflorescence actually they are typical because their inflorescence is never seen as open, but it is actually a cluster of many flowers, and they are present within the bulbous stem. Now, due to this unusual arrangement, because the inflorescence is not clearly visible, they were considered to be flowerless plants for several years. But because of this arrangement of the inflorescence, they need specific or specialized pollinators. Now, they have fig wasps as pollinators. So, over there, the fig trees require fig wasps as pollinators. Now, these pollinators are again very specific. That is one-to-one relationship. That is, specific type of fig tree can only be pollinated by a partner wasp. That means it is only the specific species of wasp that can pollinate that particular fig tree. And almost all the fig trees are pollinated by a very small wasp of the family Aganodidae. So the members of this family of wasps are only capable of pollinating the fig trees. And again, there is one-to-one relationship. Now, over here, it is an example of obligate or compulsory mutualism. This is an example of obligate mutualism. And what is the advantage? The fig plant gets the benefit by getting the pollination done. So it gets the advantage of by getting pollinated by wasps. And over here the wasp has the advantage because it uses the fig fruit for actually laying its eggs. So what will happen? The wasp will go inside and will lay the eggs, that is known as oviposition, and it will leave its eggs over there for them to develop. And also it uses the developing seeds, or it uses, we say, the seeds for developing embryo as a food, uses seeds as food for developing embryo. So both are getting the benefit, and the type of relationship we find over here is obligate mutualism. So in all these examples over here, right from lichens to mycorrhiza, orchids and the fig trees, we find that the organisms are dependent on each other, and during the process both the species are getting the benefit.